Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Students of the Word. Today is session number 75, and today is right about the 3-year anniversary of our study. So we've been now looking at First John for 3 years, which is a little bit longer than I expected it might take, but really, realistically, not so very much longer than I thought it might take. But we're doing good. We're going to be at least halfway through chapter 4 with this next paragraph. So figure what? Another year, year or two, maybe 2 more years, and then we'll finish up. Yeah. Um, yeah, so we'll see. I have to admit, uh I've been thinking ahead to what to do after First John. And um I have an idea, but it's a crazy idea. And I think it's such a crazy idea that it would like probably take the rest of my life to do. But basically, there are sort of two options. One is I would kind of like to take the conservative idea would be to take to kind of take all the stuff that we've been learning about all the uh everything we've been learning from studying First John, all the Greek I've been learning and everything else, and go to Paul and read one of Paul's epistles, like maybe Ephesians. That would be the conservative route. The non-conservative route would be I would love to take the opportunity to learn Hebrew same way as we've been learning Greek together, and really kind of digging into the original. Um, and if I did that, I'd kind of like uh, to you know go aparques and start Genesis 1. Um, read at least the first few chapters of Genesis. Um, but ideally Genesis 1 through 11, basically. Genesis 1 through 11 is the part of the Old Testament I would most like to be able to read in the original because it's intense. Um, but yeah, also the Gospel of John. That's another project that would be calculated to last the rest of my lifetime, I think. Now that we've gotten to know his voice. Yeah, I agree. That would be really interesting too. A really interesting follow-up. Um, so yeah, there's lots of interesting options. But we'll see. We'll see. We're not that close to coming to the end and having to make a firm decision about next projects. Um, but yeah, it is true. I have been thinking about the Gospel of John as well. Taking, as you say, taking what we've learned from First John and applying it back. Uh, but um, but yeah, learning Hebrew, that'd be fun, right? That'd be fun. Um, anyhow, we'll see. We got some time. We got some time to think it through and figure out what we're gonna do. See where we're being led at that point. But in the meantime, let's finish up chapter 12. So um, I want to take some chapter 12. Listen to me. Paragraph 12. Nope, that's 13. Um, let's look at the overall big picture because I think it's interesting. In some ways I come full circle. That was the main thing I was reflecting on when I was kind of thinking about the big picture of paragraph 12. We started off with paragraph 12 talking about spirits and how the at least in my own experience, in my own church experience, the traditional reading, the way I've always heard this passage taught is that this is about evil spirits. This whole paragraph is about evil spirits. Do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits. And the business about confessing that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is like the way to test whether, some sort of spiritual leading that you're getting is legit or not, right? Or whether you're being deceived by the enemy. Um, and the conclusion that I felt compelled to when looking at the text and looking at the words in Greek there and the way that what pneuma, spirit, seems to mean and how it seems to be used is that that's not what he's talking about there at all. And that the focus from the beginning of this paragraph and through to the end is not on spirits, as we would use the word spirits, but on teaching, on breathings, on the things that people are saying, on the words of the false prophets. Um, whether it's from the beginning, the false prophets going out into the world and breathing out into the world, um, and the business about testing the spirits, testing the teaching. This is the business about confessing, saying along with the idea of with Jesus having come in the flesh is a way of testing. Not It's not a fail proof demon detector test, but rather the basis upon which John was urging people to test the spirits. Test the breathings, test the teachings, right? Test the teachings of the false prophets, and to in order to discern the false prophets. But of course, I've said several times since then that in doing that, I'm not in any way taking like some kind of anti supernatural, reading of this and saying that like it's, I'm not in any way resistant to the idea of there being spiritual beings involved, there being demonic activity involved. And I think that when we look at the big picture of this whole paragraph, I think that that's the larger point that he lands on. So the point isn't that I think that again that again with lots of people focus on demons and evil spirits in this paragraph, and on the one hand, I think that they're quite mistaken in the way that they're understanding that. When he's talking about spirits, it's not what he's talking about, but he's also talking about that, right? He's also very interested in that. Let me try to show you what I mean. It's sort of the movement of the whole paragraph. Think about um, just looking at it briefly. We'll read it through in a second, but just before we do, look at the first two verses, first two and a half verses, which really focus on the breathings, right? On the things that the prophets are saying, right? And then halfway through through verse 3, right, we get that shift to the spirit of the Antichrist, the breathing of the Antichrist, which is already in the world, right? So that he begins to transition from so these false prophets have gone out into the world and this is what they're saying, right? And then he transitions from that to, and that's part of the big thing that's already happening in the world, right? There is the Antichrist, the breathing of Antichrist is already at work. And then he widens it further, putting it back into the terms that he established back in paragraph 9 and 10, right? About being the children of God and the children of the accuser, right? That was the language he established back in paragraph 9, and he puts it back into those terms. He's like, this is not just about, hey, they're saying things and you ought to, think twice before you believe them, right? This is not just about whether or not you believe them or not. This is about the children of God and the children of the accuser. This is about the work of the accuser that's going on in the world and the work of God that's being done through his children. Um, and just as God is working through us, there is something working through the false prophets. There is a spirit in the world. Even, how he's talked about the Antichrist, he has several times acknowledged the idea of a singular Antichrist, right? He's not, we did the Antichristoi business, right? The Antichrists, the plural Antichrists. But even as we were talking about at the time, he begins that entire discussion by affirming that it's definitely the last time, um, because you've heard that this spirit of Antichrist shall come, and he is, right? And then he goes on to talk about the Antichristoi, the Antichrists. And again, he's not contradicting there. He's saying this is what it looks like. It's this same sort of pattern. You see these false prophets, don't listen to them. This is the bigger picture that they're part of. There is the accuser that is in the world. Uh, and so by the end, what begins as don't don't listen to them, right? Don't listen to them because these things that they're breathing, right, is not true. It is not, um, They are not they're not breathing the breathings of God. They're not teaching the teachings of God. Then down to the larger issues of the world. They are from the world, therefore they speak as from the world, and the world listens to them. Um, this is about the world versus God. This is about the accuser versus God and the accuser and his children versus God and his children. So he absolutely puts this whole situation in the context of this much larger and very real spiritual struggle. Um, by this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. I think again the way that last sentence we was that sentence we were looking at last time. By this we know. Um, let's let's scroll back down and look at that sentence in the Greek here for a sec. Oop, went too far. Okay, there we go. By this we know the pneuma tes aletheos, the spirit of truth, and the pneuma tes planes. And we spent some time looking at planes last time. That the spirit of leading astray, right? A spirit of wandering. By this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. There are two spirits at work in the world. So I think when he offers this as a summary, um, coming back to that word pneuma, that word breathing, right? Um, the breathing of the false prophets, they speak as ek cosmo, right? Where we are, sorry, they are of the world, they are ek to cosmo, and because of this, ek to cosmo lalusin, they speak from the world. They are from the world and they speak from the world. And we know that there is someone in the world. Again, right? So this is not just a question of, hey, there are some folks out there saying some bad things, don't listen to them. That's where he starts, but that's not where he ends, right? Or rather, again, it's not like he changes. He just contextualizes it. By this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. The breathing of truth and the breathing of error. And I still think that it's important to hear that idea of breathing or teaching or the sort of the life that comes from like that breathing into Adam, right? Back in Genesis 2. Is truth breathing into you, or is wandering, leading astray, deception breathing into you? And because those breaths come from somewhere. They're not just the breath. And again, this brings me back to his use of the word, kind of unexpected use of the word prophets, false prophets at the beginning there. That's the sense in which they're prophets, in that their breathings are not just their own breathings. That's what it means to be a prophet, right? You're breathing somebody else's breath out. You're delivering someone else's messages. You are the mouthpiece for someone else. It's what a prophet is, right? Um, and that's what they're doing. So the spirit of truth and the spirit of error, the breathing that is the breathing out of truth, and the breathing that is the breathing out of the teaching of error, of wandering, of deception, right? Remember that phrase, the erga, the work of the evil one, that some do, like the Cain-like people do back in what was that, paragraph 10? Um, uh, yeah, anyway, so it's and the works of the evil one which Jesus came in order to pull apart, right? In order to destroy those works. That's what the spirit of truth is doing. There's the spirit of wandering, and it is in the world, and the world listens to it. But the breathing of God, the spirit of God, the pneuma to theo that we got in verse 2, right, has come to pull apart, to destroy the works of the evil one. And that is the spirit of truth, which we speak. Notice how it's interesting from a from a modern evangelical standpoint, one is tempted to think that John's kind of burying the lead here, right? That we are supposed to breathe the spirit of truth. But notice how little John emphasizes in this paragraph our teaching, our responsibility to go out and breathe the breathings of God, to be true prophets of the Spirit of God, of the Spirit of truth. That happens. He almost takes it for granted in verse 6. We are ek tou theou, right? We know this. The one who knows God listens to us, he says. He doesn't even talk about us talking. He just talks about them listening to us. He like takes for granted that we're talking, right? That we're breathing out, just as he takes for granted that there are spirits that confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. You know, there are spirits from God, there are breathings from God, there are teachings from God. But he doesn't, he doesn't give us injunctions to do that. He doesn't explain that that's something we're supposed to do. He assumes it and spends his time focused on the spirit, essentially, the spirit of wandering, the spirit of deception, the spirit of leading astray. That is what the false prophets are doing. So do you see that trend towards, no, I never went through and read it. Let me go through and read it again. Listen for that, the way that it kind of, the perspective broadens out. Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God, and every spirit that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard is coming, and now it is already in the world. You are from God, little children, and have overcome them, because greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. They are from the world, therefore they speak as from the world, and the world listens to them. We are from God, and the one who knows God listens to us. This is the one who is not from God does not listen to us. By this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. Remember the them, right? You are from God, little children, and have overcome them, have defeated them. Remember the Nike, the victory word. You have conquered them. We were saying that grammatically speaking, false prophets almost has to be what he's referring to there. It can't be spirits because the gender's wrong. It doesn't agree. And that makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense from the context of verse 4, 5 and 6, right? In what sense are we defeating the false prophets? In the sense that they're our opposite number, right? That we are the children of God, breathing the breathings of the spirit of truth. And they, the false prophets, are of the world, the children of the world, the children of the evil one, the children of the accuser, and are doing the works of the accuser, the works and whose breathing is the breathing of the spirit of deception, the spirit of leading astray. So they are we have conquered them, not in the sense that, well, I was going to say not in the sense that they are our enemy, they sort of are. I mean, by definition, if you're conquering them. But again, it's not that we're not fighting with them in as much as we're speaking against them, right? We are the alternative. They are the alternative. And as I say, our opposite number. That seems to be the context there. Yeah, by this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. Okay, so one thing that I wanted to come back to was the question of aletheia. Let's just look back briefly. I still feel like I've not given enough time to this word, truth. One thing I would acknowledge is the way in which the concept of aletheia, of truth, has been It's been a dominant idea. Uh, Notice from, okay, I'm gonna reread the entire epistle, but I'm gonna kind of skim the entire epistle and focus for a few minutes on the role that Aletheia plays, because I think it's important. Even just not just the word, but the concept of truth. Aletheia is given as opposed to lying, as opposed to deception, to leading astray. Um, one of the things, remember where we started, what was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have looked at and touched with our hands concerning the word of life. And the life was manifested, and we have seen and testify and proclaim to you. Um, Notice yeah, Stephen says, are we looking to answer the question, what is truth? Why, Stephen? You know somebody who's interested in the answer to that question? Yes, of course, the question that Pilate asks Jesus. Um, yeah, 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 kind of am. Uh, yeah, Pilate, this is for you. Um, anyway, yes. So notice the emphasis of this whole really long first sentence. What we have seen and heard, we proclaim to you also. Notice how all of this emphasis is about truth. About we are, he's using the plural here. We are saying what we know, what we have confirmed in every way. Think about concepts, other of John's favorite words, which, when you look at the overall patterns, seem clearly to be connected with this idea of aletheia. Words like ephanerothe, revealed, right? And the life was revealed. It was ephanerothed there. The life itself was revealed. Jesus is truth in the sense that he is the revelation. He is the reality. Truth is fact lining up with idea, right? And that's, of course, exactly sort of the contrary thing that he immediately goes to. God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. That's that image of truth, of identity, right? That is, I mean identity in the sense of like one thing equals another, so they are the same, right? Um, the immediate illustration. If we say that we have fellowship with him and yet walk in darkness, we lie and do not do the truth. To do the truth, right? To be in our actions true, in the sense that what we say and what we do lines up, that there's an identity there. To be light in the light with no darkness at all, right? And again, think about how similar that is to the way that he was talking from the beginning here, in paragraph 1, about the life being manifested, about our having seen, and like we can confirm that these things that we see, they line up, right? There is that complete identity. We're not leading anybody astray, right? Um, but again, all of these if our favorite if clauses of paragraph 2. If we say that we and yet do that. If we say we have no sin, we're leading ourselves astray. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and righteous to forgive our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Um, yeah. And then of course we get the same thing with this same pattern of illustrating the contrary to aletheia, the contrary of truth. The one who says, I have come to know him and doesn't keep his commandments is a liar, and the aletheia, the truth, is not in him, right? Um, Notice the two different ways in which he's used the word aletheia here. To do aletheia in verse 6 of chapter 1, right? And here in paragraph 2. If we lie and do not do the truth. Um, Here, the truth is not in somebody. So the truth is something you can do. It's also something that can be in you, just like you can walk in the light, right? Um, and of course, here, paragraph 3 is the beginning is our first instance of abiding. The one who says that he abides in him ought himself also just as he walked to walk. Um, again, that sense of truth, of integrity. Um, and then we get the same thing, he who says he's in the light and yet hates his brothers in the darkness, right? There's no aletheia there. Um, no cause of stumbling. Remember, aletheia is against planes, wandering off, going off the trail, stumbling and falling in the darkness, right? Um, yes, and we get our poem. Um, we get our opposition between the Father and the world that we've been talking about. Um, and now we get back to aletheia here in paragraph 7 when we talk about the Antichristoi. I've not written to you because you don't know the aletheia, but because you do know it, and because no lie is of the aletheia. No pseustes, no pseudes there. Pseustes is the liar, right? Who is the liar? Verse 22. But the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ. This is our first homologon, right? The denying and the confessing. Well, no, we got confessing back in verse 2, didn't we? That we thought about it differently then. But yes, truth is something that can be known. So truth is something you do. Truth is something that can be in you. And now truth is something that you know. Yes. And he segues immediately from the knowing the truth to, remember, this is all in the context of that anointing of the charisma, right? Let that abide in you, which you heard from the beginning. You know the truth, right? And to abide in that which you heard. And if that which you heard in the beginning abides in you, this seems to be what doing aletheia looks like. If you do aletheia, if you abide, if you let what you learned in the beginning abide in you, then you abide in the Son. Um, yeah, I think this is what it means to do the truth, to know the truth. Um, yeah, yeah. You have no need for anyone to teach you. But as his charisma, his anointing teaches you about all things and is true, is aletheia, is true and is not a lie. Just as it is taught you, you abide in him. Hang on. Aletheia is the noun verb. I'm forgetting the adjective form. True. That is not truth. Aletheia is truth. I forget what the adjectival form true is in Greek. Um, yeah. Anyway, um, notice too, back to Ephenerothe, right? The revelation. And of course, this brings us to paragraph 8, which is the big revelation paragraph, the paragraph about God being revealed when the age comes, right? At that time in the future, when it has not yet been revealed what we will be, but when he is revealed, we will be like him because we will see him just as he is. Notice again that same kind of truth language, right? For the revelation of seeing and knowing him just as he is. We don't know now, right? It hasn't been revealed, even what we will be. He's not been revealed to us. We don't know him yet as he is. Aletheis. Thank you, Randall. Aletheis is true. Okay. Just want to make 100% sure that it was the adjectival verb version of the same word in Greek. Aletheis. Yeah, great. Thank you. Anyway, but you see what I mean? The revelation hasn't come yet. The final revelation hasn't come. Um, but all of this language about what will come of him, what our relationship will be, um, when uh, when we are like him, because we will see him just as he is. There will no longer be any confusion, any chance of being led astray. and certainly no chance of maintaining any of those deceptions, those saying that we're walking with God and yet walking in darkness business, right? That he addressed before, which is why you should be purifying yourself even as he is pure, which leads us to our big sin paragraph, right? Um, and in the context of the sin paragraph, which we spent a lot of time discussing, you can still see this fundamental idea of, I was saying identity before, and that's true, but that word is used for lots of other things. Let's say integrity instead, um, of being who you really are and of lining up what you say you are with what you, um, lining up what you say you are with what you actually are, right? With what you actually do. And that we see as a huge interest here in paragraph 9. Um, make sure no one deceives you. The one who does righteousness is righteous, right? It's got to line up, just as he is righteous. The one who does sin is of the accuser, for the accuser has sinned from the beginning. No one who is born of God does sin, because his seed abides in him and he cannot sin because he's born of God, right? That whole circular reasoning, right? Like this kind of integrity, this is a logical necessity. Um, remember how we were connecting it back with the revelation that he was showing in paragraph 8, right? Um, this is how things are, and this is how things will be. But this idea of doing truth, of truth being the expression of all of these different kinds, these different ways of looking at this integrity, doing righteousness, saying righteousness and doing righteousness. Um, God abiding in you and you abiding in God. And if God's seed abides in you, you cannot sin because you're born of God, obviously. Um, anyone who does not do righteousness is not of God, nor the one who does not love his brother, which then leads us into the Cain paragraph and the knowing love paragraph. We know love by this, that he set out his life for us, and we ought to set out our lives for the brothers and sisters. Um, again, all of this, the Cain and Abel stuff here in the Cain and Abel paragraph, what is it? Was it 10? Paragraph 10? Um, once again, it's how how is the integrity demonstrated? We know love by this. Whoever has worldly goods, right? Whoever has the life of the world and sees his brother or sister have need and closes up his guts against him, how does the love of God remain in him? Again, that same lack of integrity, that same lack of truth, which is why when you love someone indeed, when you act loving instead of just expressing love, you're loving them indeed and in aletheia, in truth, with that same kind of integrity that he's been describing all through the entire epistle. We know that we are of the aletheia and will assure our heart before him in whatever our heart condemns us, our minds. For God is greater than our mind and knows all things. Of course, leading up to the commandment here in paragraph 11. This is his commandment, that we believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another just as he commanded us. The one who keeps his commandments abides in him, and he in him, that same integrity. We know by this, we know in this that he abides in us by the Spirit whom he has given us, by the breath that has been breathed in. And if God's Spirit has been breathed into us, what's going to happen? How do you know? You're going to breathe it out, right? You're going to do truth. You're going to do righteousness instead of sin. There's going to be that integrity. You're going to love in truth, right? Which then brings us back to paragraph 12. the spirit of aletheia and the spirit of planes, the spirit of deception, the spirit of leading astray. And remember, the first time we got planes, planeo, was when we were leading ourselves astray. If we said that we did not have sin, right? Um, yeah, yeah. I think that the main thing that strikes me from the pattern of looking at not just the use of the word aletheia, that too, but this whole concept of um, revelation and integrity that is a dominant thread through this entire epistle. Um, that's where all of the discomfort of First John comes from. Like all of the most uncomfortable, like the business about not sinning, and if you sin, then you've never known God, and um, yeah, I mean, all of the things that he says that sound so uncompromising are all about this aletheia, this integrity. Um, John is uncompromising in the sense that he does not allow that compromise is okay. You can't just, if you are abiding in, if you want God to abide in you, you have to abide in him. Um, and if you're going to abide in him, that means he's going to abide in you. And that means things, right? You can't, there is no place, there is no concept of nominalism for John, right? Of just being mostly okay or being sort of vaguely aligned with God. Um, you know, you sort of put yourself on the roster and are generally a good person, right? This does not compute with John at all from the very start. And that just, it seems like that's, as I say, I think it's the thing that seems to me to make most people most uncomfortable about John. Um, but let's keep going. We still have a little bit of time. Let's take a peek at paragraph 13. So first of all, I stopped at verse 13. Let me show you why. Um, I am judging now. So let me make a confession. I am judging where it sounds to me rhetorically like his paragraphs are ending, based primarily on his paragraphs to this point. The reason I'm laughing at myself is that means if I was wrong before, then I'm going to be wrong again now, right? So, um, you know, like I'm doubling down essentially. Um, but I think it works. So let me show you. Well, let's just look at it in the interlinear here for a second. So we're going to look over here at the Greek, but we're going to ignore the Greek for a minute. Let me just read it. Beloved, let's love one another, for love is from God, and everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. The one who does not love does not know God, because God is love. All this uncompromising stuff again. By this, the love of God was revealed in us. Oh, look, Revelation. That God, I bet that's a phanerothe, right? That God has sent his only Son into the world so that we may live through him. Ooh, really fascinating world business right there, right? Um, Okay, anyway, sorry. Send his son into the world so that we may live through him. In this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his son to be the propitiation for our sins. Ooh, straight back to paragraph 2. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God. If we love one another, God remains in us, and his love is perfected in us. Ooh, paragraph 3. By this we know that we remain in him and he in us, because he has given to us of his spirit, of his pneuma, of his breathing. Okay. Let me jump ahead. Let me read the next verse and explain why I think it breaks there. Okay. By this we know that we abide in him and he in us, because because of the spirit that he has given to us. Next sentence. And we have seen and testify that the Father has sent the Son as Savior of the world. Whoever shall confess that Jesus Christ is the Son And then it continues from there. So the question is this sentence, verse 14, and we have seen and testified that the Father has sent the Son as Savior of the world. Is that the end of the paragraph? Like, is that the rhetorical finish of the paragraph, or is that the beginning of the next paragraph? Um, yeah. So, and again, I don't think that there's a lot. When I'm breaking up the paragraphs, I don't think there's a huge amount riding on this, right? Like we're gonna get it all one way or another. Um, I do think it's useful to try to see the way that his thought is breaking up, but it seems to me, um, by this in this we I bet you that's in. Ha, correct. En tuto. In this, we know. What do they have? What's the NASB have against the preposition in? It's this strange bias. In this, we know that we remain in him and he in us because he has given to us of his spirit. That feels to me like the end of the paragraph. In part, it feels to me the end of the paragraph because it's almost exactly like the end of this paragraph. We know by this that he abides by, we know in this that he abides in us by the spirit he has given us, right? We know that we remain in him and he in us because of he has given us his spirit. So the great similarity between those two, which I think are really designed to relate, to connect to one another, to reflect each other, as the capstones of those paragraphs, and therefore to help to bring the two paragraphs next to each other as well. The next sentence certainly could be, and we have seen and testify that the Father has sent the Son as Savior of the world, is definitely something that, I mean, he could lead to that. I mean, he is leading that, even if it's the next paragraph, right? Um, but it seems to me that if I ask myself, does that seem like the end of this paragraph or the beginning of the next paragraph? It feels like it's the beginning of the next paragraph, which is going to go on. Whoever shall confess that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, God abides in him and he in God, and we have come to know and come to believe the love that, right? So I think that's why I decided to break it after 13, even though the NASB does not. The NASB breaks it after 14. Um, but the combination of the echo of paragraph 11 and the way that that next sentence really seems to kick off the next little line of discussion, which is a like a refinement, it's a development rather of what he's saying here in this paragraph. It seemed to me, I think 13 was the end. So this my explanation, my justification. Um, yeah, it does flow as Randall says, but it does seem to pivot a little. Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think he's interjecting that new thing there, and that's why it's a new paragraph. But I was gonna say, it's not the most meaningful thing. Like I don't think it makes a huge difference. Um, but for what it's worth, I I break the paragraph after 13. Okay. So yes, Scott, I agree with you that this paragraph alone could be a year of study. There is a lot in here. Um, we are into the uh, we are into the love section of First John now. Some really famous verses from this part of First John, and not famous in being controversial, but famous in being like there's a lot of cross stitch floss that has been spent on this paragraph, right? Um, a lot of sermons that have been preached out of this paragraph, more than out of uh, paragraph 13 here gets a lot more play on Sunday mornings in general than like paragraph 7 about the Antichristoi and stuff, right? Yeah, Susan, I agree. This is a much safer paragraph, right? Um, but we're in a much better position to see the kind of impact of it. Um, yeah, Scott, exactly. Scott was saying there's a lot of verses here I've heard a million times. Yeah, and it's so illuminating to come to those now, like when you understand the context better, right? Now that we have a fuller grasp on this, and we can already see, I mean, you notice how all of this stuff was popping out in a new way, right? Um, how much this reminds us of the way that John has already been talking. Um, the freight that loving one another already has, that it built up in this epistle. Um, uh, Everyone who loves has been born of God. The weight that that has now has been born of God and knows God. We can already think of the verses that that corresponds to from earlier on. Um, what does it mean to say that God is love? Now, that's probably the single most, I think that's fair. I think it's fair to say God is love is probably the most uh famous like phrase in all of First John. Um, by this the love of God was revealed in us. Again, just think of how that the love of God was revealed in us. Um, think the weight that that sentence has now, coming now, right after paragraph 8, right after the all the other revelation stuff that we have seen. Um, and even back to paragraph 11, the Cain and Abel paragraph about loving your brother and loving in deed and in truth, right? About Jesus setting out his life for us. Um, this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us. And back to being the propitiation for our sins, returning to paragraph 2 there. Whew. Yeah. Yeah, Jack. Yeah. Yes. God is love is really popular at weddings. I try not to get annoyed at weddings. There's so many love verses. And so many times I'm sitting there at weddings like, do you have any idea what we're talking about here? Like, yeah, yeah. But I agree, Scott, it is true. Nobody cross stitches propitiation. Rarely, rarely, yes. Um, yeah, yeah. But you're right, Scott. At least it is better than getting the ring, Tolkien's ring inscription on your wedding rings. It's true. It's true. Rather have people uh reading First Corinthians 13 without understanding than than doing that. Anyway, okay. Um, no one has ever seen God. Oh man, I can't wait to get there. Uh, yes. Yeah. So much fun. Okay. Um, by this we know that we abide in him and he in us because he's given to us of his spirit. Whew, so cool. Anyway, but it's one of the really great things of having again looked at the context, having studied the way that John thinks and the way that John talks and all the patterns of his language, is that now, man, this whole paragraph pops in completely new ways. Um, let's uh let's have a look at the first sentence here. Agapetoi, beloved, we should love. Huh? Should we? No, I'm not questioning it. Present subjunctive. Huh? We should love. Right. Okay. Just present subjunctive. We should love. Right. Let us love. We ought to love. Hortatory. Right. Hortatory means you're like not commanding someone to do. It's not an imperative. Right. It's like, hey, everybody, this would be a good idea. Right. So it's like we ought to love one another. Right. Beloved, we ought to love one another. Hoti. Okay. All right. Back to one of my favorite words. Hoti. In that, hoti he agape ektutheo esteem. Right. Of course. Love is ektutheo. Look at that. Man, um, when you've seen this sentence cross-stitched before, right? Let's love one another for love is from God. Um, think how much more weight it now has to hear John say agape is ektu theou. Agape ektu theou estin. Right? Agape estin ektu theou. Who was he saying ektu theou estin before? We are ektu theou. Right? We're the ones who are ektu theou. Agape is ektu theou. Notice the wordplay. Agapetoi, beloved, beloved ones. We we should love. Uh, let's love one another. Hoti. So the hoti here, Randall, it's not exactly causal, right? In that, more like in that, right? Love one another in that love is from God. I mean, it's because is fine. Doesn't exactly say that love being from God is what triggers it. It's what like explains it, justifies it. Why should we agapom and alelus? Um, in the meantime, of course, agapom and alelus, that's the commandment, right? Oh, I know. Randall says Hoti can have a variety of applications. Can't it though? Right? One of our favorite things. In that, right? I mean, it's um I the reason I get cautious with just throwing out because seems fine. But there are different senses of because, right? Um, you could say because is giving a giving a cause, providing the grounds for something, right? Um, anyway, sorry, wait, I was going back. And the reason I was going back, hang on, what am I looking for? What am I doing? Where am I? Who am I? I'm forgetting what I am. Everyone who loves has been, for love is from God. Oh yeah, Alelos, that's where I was going. Um, love one another. Verse 23, 3:23. That's the commandment. He's repeating, and this is the first time we've seen it repeated since he articulated it as the commandment, right? This is the commandment that we should believe in the name of his son, Jesus Christ, and agapomen alelus, kai agapomen alelus. I thought that was exactly word for word, precisely identical, and it is. Agapomen alelus. That's what we're supposed to do. Um, so, beloved, agapomen alelus. Let's do it. Let's follow the commandment, beloved ones. Hoti agape ectu theou esti, because love's from God. Um, yeah, I agree. Randall says it's not truly causal, but maybe more in the sense of here's why I say that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think in that works in English, I think would work for that. In that love is from God. Um, yes. So in repeating agapom and alelos, we should love one another. Um, let's do it. Let's love one another. Let's do the commandment. Let's keep the commandment. Why? Well, because agape ectu theou estin. We ectu theou estin, right? Agape ectu theou estin. Kai pas ho agapon. All right, each of the loving ones. Love it. Each of the loving ones, ectu theou gegenetai, has been born of God. And we're straight back to paragraph 8 now. Remember that? Paragraph. Oh, overshot it. Um, If you know that he is righteous, you know that everyone also who does righteousness is born of him. Yeah, Gegenitai. Um, Kai genoske ton theo and knows God, has been born ectu theo. Hmm. Hang on a second. Paragraph 8. Right, very end of chapter 2. Ex auto. I was wanting to see if there was an ectu theo in here. It's not, it's ex auto, but that's the hymn in question, I think pretty clearly. Um, Gigenitai, and wanted to 100% confirm that I was correct in remembering that this is the same word, but it is. Um, if you know idete, that he is dikaios, righteous, then eugenosco, that each of the doing righteousness ones has been begotten of him. See that how similar that is in its construction? Pasho, each of the loving ones has been born ectu theo, and gnoske ton theo, and knows God. Yes, you're right. Thanks, Randall, for pointing that out. It's one of the dangers of um the interlinear is that it breaks everything up so much you can't see it so closely. As Randall says, this verse has a really neat ring in the Greek. Here when he's talking about when he's talking about everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Ek tu theo gegenitai kai genoskai ton theon. Um, yes, yes. There's a what it does. It's almost chiasmic with gegenitai and genoskai, the two G words right in the middle, born of God and know God, and then tu theo and ton theon on either side. Yeah. Yeah. Ek tu theo gegenikai kai genoske ton theon. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That is lovely. Yes. Ek tu theo gegenitai kai genoske ton theon. Yes. And that's what's true of each of the loving ones. Notice again, we've talked about this before, right? I perked all up when I saw pasho ago, when I saw pasho, right? Because I love this expression. I love this. This is one of my favorite syntactic maneuvers from John, right? Each of the loving ones, his use of the present participle in that way, instead of using a pronoun, he does this thing with the present participle instead, focusing not on a pronoun, which is a way of referring to a person generically, like an unknown person. And here, instead of just introducing a, a pronoun, an unknown person, he instead introduces, he just focuses on the action, right? This is what matters. The loving ones. Um, the loving ones have been born from God and know God. So he introduces this beautifully balanced, almost symmetrical description of each of the loving ones. Um, Notice that he takes agape is Agape estin is ectu theou. Each of the loving ones has been born ectu theou. So it's interesting because it's almost exactly the same, right? You've got agape, noun, ectu theou estin. Agape is ectu theou. Agapon, the loving ones, gegenetai ectu theou. So if love is ectu theou, loving ones have been born ectu theou. So he takes the noun and changes it into a present participle. And then he takes the linking verb and turns it into an active verb, right? So instead of just love conceptually as a noun, it's now loving as an action, and it is an action, right? Um, yeah, exactly. The parallel between Estin and Gegenetai is exactly what I'm developing here. Um, and of course, knows is the other parallel, right? Love itself in the abstract is from God. People who love are also from God, but they're not just from God with a linking verb, right? They're from God with two action verbs, having been born and knowing God. They come from God in this active way. They have been born from God, begotten by him. They are his children and they know him. So there's a thing about where we came from and there's a thing about what we do. We know him. Gnoske, ton theon. That Gegenetai having has been born, ectu theou, to kind of doubles down on one of the primary meanings of ectu theou that we've been looking at from the first time it was used, right? Ectu theou, from God, like descended from God, with God as our in that parenthood sense, in that family sense. Um, to be born ectu theou, again, as I say, that doubles down on it, right? On that sense of identity, on that sense of belonging, on that sense of connection to God, which transcends merely the linking verb. So remember, all of this is an explanation. This is all the basis for why it's really a pretty good idea for us to agapomen allelus, to love one another, right? Not just because love in the abstract is ectu theou, is a God thing, comes from God, is part of that spirit of truth thing that we were just looking at in the last paragraph. It's a thing that is love, agape is a thing that is breathed out by God, but it's embodied in this way. Everyone, we should, another reason, or, to continue why we should agapomen allelus, why we should love one another, is because of what it says about all the loving people. What is true of all the loving people, about where they have been born and whom they know. And of course, we know how John likes to turn these things around, right? If it's true that we ought to love one another because love is ectu theou and the loving ones are born ectu theou and know theon. But it's also true that therefore, if we don't love one another, we're not ectu theou. Back to Cain and Abel again, right? That was exactly the distinction being made back in paragraph 10, right? Um, I mean, that was exactly it. Not as Cain, right? Um, yeah, that's really interesting. Randall says the perfect tense. He's thinking of gigantai is in the perfect tense. Present perfect has been born. It says that the perfect tense has a strong focus on the present result, right? Like what is now true in the present tense. So has been born has a force that is very similar to is a child. Yes, has been born. It's a thing that has been accomplished. Yeah. And gnosko, present tense, right? We get that's it's like I said, Gigenitai is about where you came from, and Gnoske is about who you are, right? Gigenitai is present perfect, right? Talks about not just the past, not just about a thing that happened in the past, but about the thing that has happened in the past that has brought about the present situation, the present reality. You have been born, ectu Theo, and you know Theo. Yep, that's what all the loving, it's what's true of the loving people, just like it was true of the doing righteousness people back in paragraph 8, right? The doing righteousness people are gigenetai, ex auto, right? From him, from God. But yeah, the converse also is important, and he has said it before, and he'll come back to it again. Um, if you're not aletheia, right? If you're not, if you're not true, um, if you say you love your brother but you don't, if you don't love in truth, then you're on the Cain side rather than the Abel side of the equation. Um, yeah, uncompromising. But he doesn't go there here. I don't want to. I was gonna say I don't want to put words in his mouth. I'm just referring to his other words, which seem relevant here. But it is not. He doesn't immediately go there. Oh, yes, he does. In the next sentence. Yeah. Look at that. See, I was just anticipating him. The not loving one. Yep. Well, there you go. Hasn't known God. Awesome. Let's stop here though. We'll come back to look at that. See, I knew he was gonna go there. Um, yeah. Uh, yes, yes. Okay. Anyway, let's look at what he says about because of course we should remember where he said like has not known God, right? This echoes directly everybody's least favorite verse in paragraph 9, right? Um, and it's interesting how it feels more palatable here than it did back then. It's really interesting. I want to compare those two. Um, Paragraph 9, remember? Little children, make sure no one deceives you. The one who practices righteousness is right. Oops. Hang on. What's happening? Panic in the streets. Okay. Uh, Sorry. Here we are. Little children, I want to get my hand away from the keyboard. Make sure no one deceives you. The one who does righteousness is righteous, just as he is righteous. And the one who does sin is of the devil, for the devil is sin from the beginning. Um, yeah, sorry, I started too late though. No one who abides in him sins. No one who sins has seen him or knows him. There you go. There it is. No one who sins has seen him or knows him. That's everybody. That's the one that I've called everybody's least favorite verse in First John. I still think that's pretty fair. Um, no one who abides in him sins. No one who sins has seen him or knows him. So look at how he's picking up on this again. The one who does not love does not know God. So next time we will do some comparison and contrast here of verse 8 here in paragraph 13 and back up to our least favorite verse back in paragraph 9. All right, we will carry on. In some ways, I feel like we're actually accelerating because so much of this is familiar now. So much of the structure is familiar. We can make all of these connections and follow right along with what he's doing. Like, for instance, I can't help but notice the word ephenerothe right there, which I'm pretty sure must be paragraph verse 9. Yep, it is. In this has been revealed the love of God. Yep, 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 absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, Scott, exactly. As we get more used to the Greek, um, like Hoti is an old friend now, right? So, so that's fun. Again, not just the use of the word in general, but how John uses it specifically. Um, because yeah, that's the big payoff of studying this closely is that you really get to understand better how the author thinks, right? The patterns of the author's mind, or at least the patterns of the author's words. All right. Um, yeah, exactly. We're getting to know the author's idiom. That's precisely it. And that's huge fun and an enormous reward here. Especially to be able to come to know that in the Greek, um, which is so new to me and so much fun. All right. Um, yes, yeah, that was Randall Scott who was saying about knowing the author's idiom. That's exactly right. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. This has been a wonderful session, and we will continue moving through paragraph 13 here. The big, well, the first of the big love paragraphs here in chapter 4. All right, everybody. Thanks very much, and I will see you next time. Bye now.